Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Robert Ayan from the Guayaquil Space Society, and we're very happy to have you become part of this event tonight. We have some amazing guests, and we're so happy that our president from the National Space Society, Michelle Hanlon, is with us tonight, and that's great. So we definitely want to give her a very warm welcome with her today. And we have an exciting event planned for you, talking about the Artemis Accord, the press, and how, in this case, Ecuador can participate with the speakers that we have. So I want to introduce Karina Galvez. Karina, one of our founding members of the Guayaquil Space Society, who will continue the event as the moderator. Thank you, Karina.
Thank you so much, Robert, and thank you everybody for joining us tonight. It is certainly a very, very interesting topic, talking about space law. What is it that we're going to do when there's interaction among all the humans flying in somewhere in space? We have some. We appreciate everybody putting themselves on mute. Or if maybe Kurt can help us muting everybody.
14643, delegación Tlalpan. Vete para allá, puto de mierda, y te de 3 vergazos. Chingada madre. Pinche pendejo. De robar al erario público, no. Yo, además de famoso, talentoso, inteligente y bueno para los chingadazos, soy millonario.
We have like somebody interrupting the session, so we'll just be one moment, please.
Tengo un Lamborghini, 2 Bentleys, tengo Jaguares, Mercedes, tengo...
Okay, now we're with that person gone. We can continue. Thank you, Karina.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Sergey. He's from the technical department from the CEN, the Centro Ecuatoriano Norteamericano. This webinar is brought to you by the Guayaquil Space Society, which is a member of the National Space Society. Guayaquil Space Society was founded on November the 6th, 2019, and it's the first of its kind in Latin America. Now, we have today a topic about space law, and for the opening remarks and some interesting information about that too, we have with us Santiago Velázquez. Santiago Velázquez is the Dean, el decano de la Facultad de Derecho, Política y Desarrollo de la Universidad de Espíritu Santo. That translates to the Faculty for Law, Politics, and Development of the Universidad Espíritu Santo University from San Borondón, Ecuador. And after that, and we'll have our guest speakers. Santiago is also head of his own law firm, and he is an arbitrator with the World Organization of Intellectual Property, and he has a doctorate's degree from Universidad of Salamanca. With that said, thank you so much, Santiago. Gracias, Santiago, por estar acá con nosotros. Y recibimos a Santiago Velázquez, él es decano de la Facultad de Derecho, Política y Desarrollo de la Universidad Espíritu Santo.
Before Santiago starts, I just want to mention that the event is in English, but for Santiago Velázquez's parts, we're going to have it in Spanish, this presentation. So this is going to be a small presentation in Spanish for non-Spanish speaking audience, just so you're aware, and we'll continue then with the presentation in English. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good night with everybody. I'm going to speak to you in Spanish because last week when they invited me, they forgot to say that I have to speak in English. And my presentation is already done in Spanish, as you can see in the screen. So I prefer to talk in Spanish at this moment. But I can understand basically, so I think that it's going to be very helpful for all of us. I have invited to talk about some specific topics related to space law and international law in a general aspects. So it's going to be a very basic intervention, but I think that it's going to be helpful to understand some specific criteria that can be helpful to understand space law to beginners, no? So I'm going to go ahead with the presentation in Spanish, as I said before. Sobre el derecho espacial, y en lo que tiene que ver con el derecho internacional, creo que vamos a encontrar muchísimas coincidencias. A partir de 1957, más o menos, podríamos fijar un punto de inicio en lo que denominamos a la fecha como derecho espacial. ¿Por qué 1957? Puesto que este fue el año en que comenzaron las misiones de los Sputnik. Y desde el inicio, la Organización de Naciones Unidas, recordemos, pues, Nobel organización para esa época, pero ya existente, demostró especial interés en lo que tenía que ver con los viajes al espacio y la conquista del espacio, tanto más pues que consistía la conquista espacial en uno de los puntos básicos de la entonces Guerra Fría, que se encontraba pues en pleno apogeo, por así decirlo. Esto ha contribuido que con el paso del tiempo se haya formado ya una disciplina a la que podríamos reconocerle autonomía y denominamos como derecho espacial. Definiciones hay múltiples, hay muchas, ninguna pues es perfecta, como no lo es ninguna definición respecto de ninguna categoría en especial. Sin embargo, nos ayudan pues a poder apreciar los principales elementos sobre los cuales pues gira la temática de, en este caso, el derecho espacial. Hemos escogido simplemente de manera ejemplificativa dos definiciones. Una que señala que el derecho espacial se trata de un cuerpo de normas jurídicas que gobierna las relaciones de derecho nacional e internacional. Eso es muy importante, puesto que a priori parecería que el derecho espacial únicamente tendría efectos o relaciones con el derecho internacional. Sin embargo, con el avance a la actualidad del derecho internacional y que ha llevado de la mano que incluso los particulares tengamos a la fecha ius standi o categoría jurídica para poder intervenir en relaciones de derecho internacional, los particulares hoy en día pues somos activos en las diversas ramas del derecho internacional. Creo que tal vez eso se puede visualizar con mucha claridad en temas como el sistema de protección internacional a los derechos humanos. Pero eso creo que nos permite a nosotros visualizar entonces que la temática del derecho espacial no es una temática ajena a los particulares como en principio podría parecer. En principio podría parecer incluso una temática ajena para el Ecuador como Estado. Y con mayor razón, algunos dirían, bueno, ¿qué tiene que ver eso conmigo como un ciudadano común y corriente? Sin embargo, creo que reflexionar brevemente sobre algunas circunstancias de actualidad nos van a dar rápidamente la respuesta, ¿no? Es un hecho reciente. Hace pocos días hablábamos de qué iba a pasar, por ejemplo, con el famoso cohete chino, que se había perdido el control del mismo. Y entonces nos encontramos claramente que esa situación de una operación espacial podría tener incidencia sobre las personas comunes y corrientes, ¿verdad? Y evidentemente que el derecho no puede quedarse pues en una respuesta a aquello. De tal manera pues que parece pues evidente y claro que la necesidad de que el derecho espacial se articule no solamente con las normas de derecho internacional, sino con los ordenamientos jurídicos nacionales. Dicho sea de paso, pues esta distinción entre derecho internacional y nacional, a la fecha, pues podríamos decir incluso que es caduca, puesto que las normas de derecho internacional se van incorporando a las legislaciones nacionales con los mismos efectos y hay una aplicación directa e inmediata en la mayoría de los casos. En la otra definición que hemos escogido, que ustedes la pueden visualizar, lo que se destaca es justamente el aspecto ya no de derecho nacional e internacional, sino de derecho público y privado, que resulta ser ese otro gran criterio de división en el derecho. Y que tiene que ver un poco con lo que he comentado, es decir, con el hecho de que estas relaciones ya no son directamente o única y exclusivamente con los estados, sino también con los particulares. Desde luego, pues como otras disciplinas jurídicas, pues hay una cantidad y variedad de nombres, pero a la fecha es generalmente aceptada la de derecho espacial. Un punto importante en este tema es quiénes serían los sujetos del derecho espacial, es decir, quiénes tendrían aptitud jurídica o ius standi para intervenir en las relaciones propias del derecho espacial. A priori, como le hemos señalado, los estados, las organizaciones internacionales intergubernamentales, pero poco a poco también han ido ganando esta categoría, como lo he dicho, los particulares y muy específicamente entidades internacionales no gubernamentales que incluso están promoviendo algunas actividades hasta a la fecha pues son conocidas de, entre comillas, turismo espacial. De tal manera pues que todas estas categorías jurídicas del derecho espacial no son ajenas a lo que podríamos denominar pues derecho privado. ¿Cuáles serían las fuentes del derecho espacial desde el punto de vista técnico? Bueno, básicamente se acepta que son las mismas que las del derecho internacional, es decir, todas aquellas descritas en el Tratado de Creación de la Corte Internacional de Justicia, en su famoso o conocido artículo 38, ¿no? Las convenciones internacionales, la costumbre internacional, formado desde el inicio, esta última, yo evocaba hace un momento las operaciones de los Sputnik para el año 1957, y a partir de ahí empieza pues a formarse la costumbre internacional en esta rama del derecho, puesto que ya con esas primeras expediciones se permitió la utilización del espacio aéreo de todos los estados para el lanzamiento o retorno de los vehículos espaciales, lo cual pues ya luego recogido en normas escritas, pero que inicialmente nació pues como una costumbre internacional. Principios generales del derecho, básicamente cualquiera de lo que tenga que ver con los tratados internacionales, nos referimos a la Convención de Viena sobre el derecho de los tratados, pacta sunt servanda, el principio de buena fe, la imposibilidad de alegar pues razones internas para dejar de cumplir las obligaciones internacionales y el reconocimiento pues también de una suerte de derecho común para toda la humanidad. Y muy específicamente en el derecho espacial, pues la cooperación internacional, la no apropiación nacional del espacio, el deber de información, el estatus de los astronautas como enviados de la humanidad, la responsabilidad internacional de los estados y la no alteración de derechos de propiedad industrial e intelectual en el espacio. Casos jurisprudenciales o casos que se hayan resuelto en las cortes, hay muchísimos, simplemente he citado algunos de manera meramente ejemplificativa. Algunos pueden llamar la atención fácilmente, como el caso de la embajada china, en el cual pues se trataba de vender parcelas de la luna a ciudadanos, y hemos dicho hace un momento que un principio básico es la imposibilidad de una apropiación exclusiva del espacio por parte de un determinado estado, ¿no? Pero sin embargo, pues estas situaciones se siguen pues generando. El interés por esta rama ha generado que dentro de Naciones Unidas se haya desde el inicio, como decía yo, buscado establecer órganos específicos en la materia, y es así como surge la Comisión sobre Utilización del Espacio Ultraterrestre con fines pacíficos, que está compuesta de una subcomisión científica y técnica y de una jurídica. Existen también otras oficinas para los asuntos propios del espacio ultraterrestre. Como vemos, pues son ya instituciones de más de 50 años. Instrumentos normativos, muchos, variados y que van en constante evolución. Como se trata básicamente de relaciones regladas por el derecho internacional, instrumentos normativos de diversa jerarquía. Pero evidentemente dentro de ellos destaca pues lo que se conoce como el corpus juris espaciales, es decir, la columna vertebral del derecho espacial a nivel de los tratados, y que está constituido o dado por el Tratado del Espacio de 1967, el Convenio de Salvamento de 1968, el Convenio sobre Responsabilidad de 1972, el Convenio sobre Registros de 1975 y el Acuerdo sobre la Luna de 1979. Esto vendría a ser el núcleo duro del derecho internacional en relación al derecho aeronáutico, pero eso no exime o no quiere decir que no haya otras normas, desde luego, ¿no? Hay resoluciones como las relativas al análisis del concepto jurídico de estado de lanzamiento, las directrices de Naciones Unidas para reducción de desechos espaciales, recomendaciones para las mejoras de la práctica de los estados y las organizaciones internacionales en cuanto al registro de objetos espaciales, entre otros. El Tratado del Espacio de 1967, ¿cuáles son sus principales tópicos de manera somera? La libertad de exploración y utilización del espacio, la no apropiación del espacio por parte de ningún nacional, la conformidad de las normas del derecho espacial con el derecho internacional, el uso pacífico del espacio, el carácter o concebir a los astronautas como enviados de la humanidad en sentido amplio, la responsabilidad internacional atada directamente al estado de lanzamiento, la responsabilidad por daños, la no contaminación, la cooperación internacional, el deber de información, la reciprocidad y el principio de precaución. El acuerdo sobre salvamento y devolución de astronautas y restitución de objetos lanzados al espacio ultraterrestre, Básicamente nos define la autoridad de lanzamiento, pero también nos desarrolla los conceptos de deber de salvamento, deber de búsqueda, devolución segura y sin demora y la restitución de objetos espaciales. El convenio sobre responsabilidades del año 1972 define lo que es el daño, la responsabilidad absoluta, el régimen culposo de responsabilidad, la figura de la responsabilidad solidaria, las exenciones de responsabilidades, los reclamos por daños, la forma de presentar los reclamos por daños, el plazo para las reclamaciones, los tipos de reclamaciones, las determinaciones de las indemnizaciones y cómo hacer efectivas y pagar las indemnizaciones. El convenio sobre el registro de objetos lanzados al espacio ultraterrestre, básicamente lo que hace es constituir un sistema de registro doble nacional y un registro a cargo de Naciones Unidas que fundamentalmente tiene la información de cuándo y dónde se lanza el objeto, funciones generales y detalles de sus órbitas, y se regula el contenido de la información registrada. Y los estados pues, que tengan instalaciones para observación y rastreo pueden dar información en caso de que un objeto espacial pues, haya causado un daño específico. El Acuerdo sobre la Luna de 1979 establece la necesidad de respetar el derecho internacional en la explotación de la Luna, que la utilización de la misma debe hacerse con fines pacíficos, el carácter de importancia de la exploración lunar para toda la humanidad, el deber de informar sobre las actividades de exploración a la Secretaría General de Naciones Unidas, el de la investigación y la explotación a partir del principio de igualdad, la necesidad de no perjudicar el equilibrio del medio lunar, un compromiso de no contaminación, el principio de prevención en toda actividad que se lleve a cabo en la Luna, actividades permitidas en el satélite y la regulación de las instalaciones lunares. Otros instrumentos, como he dicho, son muchísimos, un poco más actuales, declaración sobre principios que rigen la utilización de los estados de los satélites para la radiodifusión internacional directa de televisión, la declaración sobre principios relativos a la teleobservación de la Tierra desde el espacio, la declaración sobre principios relativos a la utilización de fuentes de energía nuclear en el espacio ultraterrestre. Yo creo que todo eso nos está de alguna manera enseñando la utilidad y la importancia diaria y práctica de todo lo que tiene que ver con el derecho espacial, es decir, no es algo ajeno, sino que está relacionado con cuestiones cotidianas con nosotros, con las telecomunicaciones, con las observaciones, con las investigaciones científicas, con las investigaciones a su vez de la materia, investigaciones médicas y de muchas otras naturalezas, ¿no? La declaración sobre la cooperación internacional en la exploración y utilización del espacio ultraterrestre en beneficio e interés de todos los estados, teniendo especialmente en cuenta las necesidades de los países en desarrollo, y la declaración sobre la aplicación del concepto de estado de lanzamiento. Prácticas de los estados y organizaciones internacionales en materia de registro de objetos espaciales, líneas directrices sobre reducción de desechos espaciales, eso es muy importante, regulación de la Organización Internacional de Telecomunicaciones sobre el uso de órbitas terrestres, acuerdo intergubernamental relativo a la cooperación en materia de concepción detallada, explotación y utilización de la Estación Espacial Civil habitada en permanencia, Freedom, es decir, la estación internacional, la Estación Espacial Internacional. Este fue el acuerdo originario. Desde luego hay una serie de instrumentos posteriores para poder regular la utilización de la misma, pero este fue el acuerdo originario, este acuerdo intergubernamental. Las directrices para la reducción de desechos especiales para la Comisión sobre la Utilización del Espacio Extraterrestre con fines pacíficos y los protocolos sobre bienes espaciales ya de Naciones Unidas, pero en relación a los estudios de derecho privado. Eso es lo que llama también la atención, ¿verdad? Porque la UNIDROID tiene que ver básicamente con los estudios en materia de derecho privado. La intención de esta breve introducción ha sido únicamente mostrar a ustedes la cantidad de instrumentos internacionales y solamente de manera ejemplificativa existentes sobre la materia y la conexión de la materia del derecho aeronáutico con distintas disciplinas jurídicas, así como la importancia de regular las relaciones que ocurren en el espacio en virtud de los efectos que las mismas pueden tener y de hecho tienen, no solamente sobre los estados como órganos propiamente dicho, como sujetos de derecho internacional público, sino incluso sobre los ciudadanos comunes y corrientes. Les agradezco por la oportunidad y ha sido un gusto estar con ustedes.
Muchísimas gracias, Santiago Velázquez. Thank you so much. Santiago Velázquez is a dean for the Faculty of Law, Politics, and Development of Universidad Espíritu Santo in San Borondón, Ecuador. Robert Ayllón will now share with us just a summary of what Santiago was sharing with us. Robert.
Thank you, Karina. Santiago did an interesting job in explaining, all the aspects of how the space law originates and how it encompasses and touches our daily lives, and what are the main treaties that are important, and how that has brought us to the future, which is now, in this case, since they started in the 1950s and 60s, these treaties, about what is possible and how we can participate and get involved, and how there's regulation and how countries can participate, and now nations can participate, and companies and individuals, as you see, as we grow into the space economy. So with that, we would love to introduce Steve Wolf. Karina, we can introduce Steve. He's going to give us a great macro picture of what's happening around the world, that Artemis Accords are taking place now because of that.
Absolutely. And when Robert talked about the future, if we read the website for the company that Steve chairs, we read a future with economically vibrant communities of people living and working beyond planet Earth for the benefit of all humanity. That is incredible, and it encompasses many challenges of the daily dealings among humans. Steve Wolf, he spent over 5 years at the legislative aide for space policy to the late Congressman George Brown, where Steve drafted the Space Settlement Act of 1988 containing Public Law 100-685. He served as executive director of the Congressional Space Caucus and on the board of the National Space Society. He's president and co-founder of Beyond Earth Institute, and he's also deputy director of the Global Space Board Alliance. He's partner at CWSP International, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but CWSP stands for Commercial Wideband Satellite Program. And it's in the satellite imagery industry. He's also the chair of this wonderful, interesting think tank for policymakers, anything that has to do with space law. And with that, we welcome Steve Wolf. Thank you.
Gracias, Karina, Robert, Santiago. Buenas noches, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. I just want to say that Santiago, from what I was able to gather, did a wonderful job of summarizing the history of space law as it evolved, and I imagine how it touched South America. And what I'm going to be addressing is really where we are today and how we got to where we are right now, and how, in particular, we need to be applying policy initiatives that are going to help carry us into the future. So with that, let me share my slides. Okay, just 1 second. Okay. Alrighty. Well, again, I'm very glad to be here. Before I get into some things, let me just say a couple of words about Beyond Earth, and thank you, Karina, for reading the website. Our mission is to establish and sustain a policy and legal framework that will enable economically vibrant communities beyond Earth. We see that we're at an inflection point in our development in space, where the enthusiasm for going beyond simply putting satellites into space to actually creating the means by which civilization will one day be able to extend its reach out into the moon and Mars and elsewhere. We're all very familiar with what Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos have been saying about their intention and interest in creating a multiplanetary existence for humanity. And we're very much in line with that. And the interest is growing in this as we understand the capabilities of space, and those capabilities are coming online. We are focused on a number of areas in our research. We are particularly interested in declarations of communities in space as a national and international goal. We're interested in policies that enable science and technology development that support communities beyond Earth. We are looking at building and sustaining space infrastructure via innovative financing mechanisms. And we are looking to establish rules of laws and norms of behavior, and that ties in directly with the Artemis Accords. And I'll get into that in a bit. And we're also looking at areas like how do you do permitting, establishing criteria for that, and approval process. So it's a range of issues that we are undertaking at the Beyond Earth Institute. Just to make a little announcement that we do have our next webinar coming up on June 10th, June 10th, 2 to 3 Eastern Time. And this is focusing on advanced financing options for large-scale space infrastructure and habitat projects. This discussion will actually launch a multi-pronged research initiative that will result in a report. So certainly look for information on that. All right, let's get to it. You know, how did it all begin? You know, I think when we look at where we are today in space, we need to look at what happened in the mid-2000s, right? Up until then, you could argue that space was kind of a boring place. There was certainly a lot going on, no question. But by and large, you know, we had satellites in geostationary orbit. We had about 1,000 satellites up there, not insignificant by any measure. It was very expensive to do. Satellites, launches, you had a 1 in 10 chance at the time that your launch would fail. Certainly we had the space station and we had the space shuttle, but of course we had the 2003 space shuttle disaster. So it was good, but it basically where it was as it had been for a few decades. But then two interesting developments happened around that time, around the mid-aughts. It was the advent of two interesting technologies. One is a CubeSat, and it was two professors at California State Polytechnic Institute that, as part of a course, created this idea of saying, okay, let's, as a class project, let's see if we can create a satellite with a 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter cube, and pack it with as much stuff as we can. And that was sort of the beginning of a bit of a revolution in understanding that satellites did not have to be the size of a bus. You know, that they could be compact and they could have very focused functionality. The other development was NASA, a little bit strapped for cash, was trying to look for an innovative way of getting resupplies up to the space station, and they decided to take a chance on a program where they spent $300 million, which is sort of a fraction of the cost of developing a new launch system, and decided to partner with the private sector for launch services rather than purchasing the rockets outright. And this was sort of the beginning for SpaceX. And as a result of that, they were able to fund Falcon 1. Elon Musk put a lot of his own money into that. NASA supported that. And it allowed him to innovate in a way that significantly began to drive down the cost of getting into space. So satellites are smaller, rockets are cheaper. That's the baseline. So this chart here gives you an idea of how the price of per kilogram has come down over time. And I certainly don't expect people to read this, but you could see where you got down to a point where, you know, if the shuttle was here, and there's estimates that a shuttle, a kilogram of the cost of a kilogram for a shuttle ride was over $54,000. Right now, the Falcon 9 could do that for you for under $3,000, and it's coming down precipitously as well. So that just illustrates that. Of course, part of this price reduction is the idea of reusing the rockets, so you're not throwing them away every time that you use them. And SpaceX just celebrated reusing a booster for the 10th time. Now back to the satellite side of things. So, you know, this technology evolved over about a decade, and you get companies like Planet, who was really an innovator in this. You know, so you see here racks of small satellites the size of a bread box. It's not a clean room. They're not concerned if the satellites malfunction. They're replaceable. They're designed to have a certain shelf life, and then they iterate the technology in these satellites as they replace them. So they're constantly, and they like to compare it to a cell phone, where the technology is constantly being upgraded and improved upon. And that is the model for many of the entrants, the satellite entrants, who are creating very large thousands of satellite constellations. And here, this chart illustrates the growth of satellites. So prior to, and you could see we're in the hockey stick, right? So prior to coming, so the 10 years prior to 2010, the number of satellites that were operational increased by 30%. From 2010 to 2020, the number of satellites increased by nearly 240%. So it's just, we're in a totally new universe. And that's really what I want you to kind of grasp as I go through these statistics. We are not where we were 15 years ago, not even 10 years ago. And so that means that we've got to reconsider and re-examine many of the space law and space policy policies that we have in mind, and certainly the Artemis program is part of that effort. This is another chart to illustrate what's going on in terms of the number of satellites that are being proposed over time. So you see, in 2012, there was less than a handful of satellites being proposed and approved and deployed. And now we're looking at over 61,000 that are proposed this year. And it is estimated by 2030, there'll be over 100,000 satellites that'll be in orbit. So what does that mean in terms of applications? It is just an explosion of potential in terms of communication, Earth observation, and all sorts of applications that can have tremendous impacts on lives of people, in terms of saving lives, in terms of food security, in terms of communications, a whole range of things, of bringing a kind of wealth, even out the kind of wealth to all nations of the world through these capabilities, quite literally. And a case in point, Robert and I are working on an initiative with Orbital Sidekick to bring some satellite information and doing a case study with the banana industry in Ecuador. So this is the kind of thing that as these technologies are penetrating places of the world that just prior to this had not really thought about satellite capabilities as being relevant to them. But the dark side of all this, of course, is what's called space debris, and I definitely caught that in Santiago's presentation. That space debris is a challenge. I tend not to really like this kind of a photograph, which illustrates all of the presence of debris. Certainly, you can't see any of it with the naked eye from this distance from the Earth. However, it is a hazard that we have to deal with, especially with the explosion of additional satellites that are being launched and additional capabilities that we're looking at in space. The United States has really been a leader at trying to address this, and this is ongoing. The U.S. Space Policy Directive 3 on orbital debris mitigation standard practices provides instructions for emerging space activities, rendezvous and proximity operations, active debris removal, and this has influenced international guidelines, particularly through UN COPUOS. But ultimately, we can do a lot to mitigate debris accumulation through proper planning of satellites from beginning to end of life. But there will be a need to go out there and actually clean up the mess, clean up the debris. So some interesting companies are coming online to address that problem. And I won't get into that now, but it's an important aspect of this. And also it creates opportunity for commercial applications. This one company, Cislunar, I was just talking to them today, and they're looking to be a salvager. They want to go and pick up debris and satellites that have been left dormant by their owners, and they want to convert that into usable material and reuse that material. The other side, the other activity in space is trying to service satellites. So rather than a satellite becoming inoperable, like when they run out of fuel because they can't maneuver in space, there are efforts underway to say, okay, well, let's just figure out a way to service those satellites and then extend their life. So this, what this is pointing to is additional activity. Again, when we're looking at around 2000, satellite was put up in space and it was just left there until its fuel ran out. And when its fuel ran out, it was dead and there was nothing you could do about it. You'd invest hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes more. And then when it was out of fuel, that was it. All that perfectly good hardware is gone. And so we're just totally changing our view in space. So, and it's just creating all kinds of additional commercial opportunities. And this is an example of one of them. Another example is a refueling capability. So an interesting company, OrbitFab, is offering to provide refueling for satellites. So again, it's this idea that satellites, that there's an infrastructure in space that is supporting satellites and other kinds of activities in space over time. Coming back down to Earth, another interesting development is the proliferation of spaceports. Where do we launch from? So it used to be the strict domain of a handful of governments. In the United States alone, there were 12 government launch sites. Over the last 10 years, there have been 12 additional licensed commercial space sites, four private, and then another 12 are being proposed. These are all over the country in different states. And so everyone is really excited, especially when they see what's going on with Virgin Galactic, and they want to be part of that future. And they're becoming, and many of these spaceports are becoming hubs of innovation for the communities that they serve. And actually, this is giving a little bit of shout out to the Global Spaceport Alliance. Robert is a member, and this is the other hat that I wear in terms of promoting and providing services to the spaceport community. The other bit is very, very important, and this is probably could even eclipse even the satellite side. It is the human dimension of getting into space. So we know, we've heard that SpaceX is now delivering astronauts to the ISS. In the upper left-hand corner here, in the lower right-hand corner, that's inside the Blue Origin capsule. Well, they will be giving rides. These habitats, if you see in the upper right, is an Axiom module, which is a commercial habitat that will be attached first to the space station, and then it will be a free flyer. In the lower left is an Ixiom commercial habitat that is a reconfigured booster. So they've taken essentially a fuel tank and refitted the inside of it to be a habitable habitat. So now we're getting into the human side of it, right? And when you talk about the human side, there's a lot of excitement about the Artemis program and NASA planning to get back to the moon. And there's going to be a lot of activity there, and a lot of activity for commercial players and international players. Now, and the U.S. government also through DARPA is a research arm of the Department of Defense, and they are spending significantly on looking at how to develop technologies that will allow people to live and work on the moon and in space. China, you might have heard that China recently formed an agreement with Russia to develop their own lunar base. So this is an interesting development. Now we're seeing a great deal of interest in getting back to the moon, and we're creating something of another space race, right? And this is the effort by the Europeans that even before the United States has been talking about the moon, they've been promoting a moon village, is what they call it. But talking about this, obviously competition is good, but as folks know, there are tensions, and so and there's been a lot of discussion that China is looking to develop an anti-satellite weapon that have the ability to knock out our eyes to be able to see what's going on the ground. And I think it's a concern. I don't know it's a full-blown threat, but it's something we have to watch. And it probably offers justification for us to look at beefing up our space security capabilities. And we're all familiar with the establishment of the United States Space Force. So what this all means, though, what this means is that the intensity and interest in space is expanding exponentially. And so what was true 10 years ago just plain isn't true anymore. And just one more thing I want to talk about. Now, folks might have seen the launch and landing of the SpaceX Starship vehicle last week that landed on it and didn't blow up this time. But this vehicle, if this works out for Elon, and every indication seems to be that he's on track for this, is going to be a whole other level of transformation, even far beyond what we've seen. So maybe, you could get a pound of payload into orbit for $1,000 or $2,000, with this vehicle, Elon has an aspiration of saying, we're going to get that down to $10 or at least under $100. When you do that, it changes things in every way in terms of accessing space. So now, just a couple of things about about the Artemis Accord. One of the first things that Beyond Earth did when we formed last year was to do a research study where we asked these experts, and you'll notice Michelle is there, and we asked them what they thought are the most important policy issues that needed to be addressed or considered if we were to eventually develop communities beyond Earth. Quite interestingly, and I will say that this came out just about the time we completed it, before the Artemis Accords were announced and published it about the time that it was made official. But one of the key things that came out of this paper was that we recommended that working within the context of the Outer Space Treaty and in accordance with the international law, there's tremendous opportunity for nations with bold vision for space to join in a bilateral and multilateral accords to spur more rapid development of the space economy and achieve a permanent, widespread human presence in space. And and it's probably no secret. I think this kind of discussion had been going on. We recognize that the existing space treaties and space laws that were put in place in the 60s, served us very well, still serve us very well in many ways. But as we move forward, we want to look towards bilateral and multilateral agreements, country to country, is going to be more efficient and more effective over time. And I'm going to, so that's really all I want to say about the Accords, and I'm going to leave the rest to Michelle to dig more into the specifics of that, and then I'll have some comments afterwards.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's certainly totally interesting. Something caught my ear. The intensity of the interest in space is expanding exponentially. And with that, really, we sometimes we don't even think about how interconnected we are and how Earth is already too small for us. And now with that, I'm going to give a warm welcome to Michelle Hanlon. And she's going to talk to us about the Artemis Accord. But who is Artemis? She's the Greek goddess of the hunt, the wilderness, wild animal, the moon, and chastity. And I bring that up not because I read the wrong portion of Wikipedia, but because it is really interesting that goddesses, sorry for being so humble, women are also into space and space law. And in fact, I am very honored to say that Michelle Hanlon is the co-founder of For All Moonkind Incorporated. She is the president of the National Space Society. She's the first Chinese American woman to occupy that position, and I think the first Chinese American in general to occupy that position. She's also this year part of the first female executive team of the National Space Society. Michelle is an advisor of the board of the Beyond Earth Institute, which was co-founded by Steve Wolf. She's co-director of the Air and Space Law program at the University of Mississippi School of Law and its Center for Air and Space Law, editor-in-chief of the Journal of Space Law. And here we have her sharing her knowledge with us. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Karina. I just want to say I'm so delighted to accept this invitation to speak to this NSS chapter. I hope that you will be, I know that you already are a model for international chapters all around the world. And we're really looking forward to building that international community. And I applaud you for what you've started in Ecuador. And I can't wait to come and be there in person. That's one of my goals as president, is to visit every single chapter. So thank you. As you said, I am the co-director with the Center for Air and Space Law at the University of Mississippi School of Law, where we are focused on figuring out, providing the laws and regulations necessary to make us a spacefaring species. So we're really looking at supporting commercial space and also thinking about what it means for humans to be spacefaring and what it means for humans in space, and how do we protect things like the environment in space and human rights in space and labor laws and all the things that a lot of people think, oh, we have plenty of time. But we really need to lay the foundation right now so that our progeny, our futures, are safe and secure and sustainable and successful. I also have to do the plug. Space law is one of the most exciting and fast evolving dynamic areas of law. We at the University of Mississippi offer an LLM, so a Master of Laws, as well as a graduate certificate. And the great news is that you can earn that completely online. So we were online before the pandemic. We know how to do this. This is actually, I'll admit, the first time I have gotten on without forgetting to unmute myself. So even though I've been teaching online for 4 years, I still forget that. But it's a fantastic program, and I know Ecuador needs space lawyers, and so we would welcome you to come and learn with us. As you mentioned, I'm also the co-founder and president of For All Mankind. We're the only organization in the world that is committed to protecting our human heritage in outer space. We're a permanent observer to the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, and we're really proud of that position. And when we think about heritage in space, it's funny because a lot of people think, well, we've only been in space for 50 years, 60 years. How can we possibly have artifacts there? And we have a lot of artifacts. And one of the things I wanted to point out today in particular was there are messages of peace from over 70 nations that went up to the moon with Apollo 11. And Ecuador was one of the nations that contributed a message of peace. And this was the sincere wishes for the success of the heroic young astronauts with the sublime valor will set foot on the moon, dominating the laws of outer space and consecrating the grandeur of human understanding and goodwill. And so what we learned when we started to do research about what is on the moon is this disk, it's the size of a US $50, with these more than 70 nations, with messages like this filled with hope and with peace. And so what we internalize here at For All Mankind is that space means hope and peace. And so whatever we're doing, all the exciting stuff that Steve talked about, the bottom line is that the space is our future. And when we get into space and look back, hopefully we can bring sort of that unity of space with us back to Earth. So Dr. Velasquez did a great job, as far as I could tell in my very limited Spanish, of running down through the international law, the international space law. So I won't, we already talked about all the treaties that there are. I'm actually delighted to say I took Spanish in elementary school, but a lot of the provisions are universal. Like, when you read about, when you can see even in Spanish or English, the universal guidelines of the international law treaties, space law treaties. And so it was really eye-opening to me to be able to follow along with that and really recognize just how important that Outer Space Treaty is. So the Outer Space Treaty is the Magna Carta of space law. Again, I won't go through it all because we went through what Dr. Velasquez did so well, but we see space as the province of all humankind. It's free for exploration and use by all states, free access to all areas of celestial bodies, freedom of investigation. And so we know that space is for everyone, and that space, it can be used and explored by everyone. And those are the most fundamental principles of space law. The Outer Space Treaty, as you know, goes on with several other provisions. The important one I want to point out is Article 2, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means. And so now we're already seeing, even within the Outer Space Treaty, we're seeing some conflict, right? Because it's free for use by everybody, but you can't own it. So what does that mean when you're using it? Does that mean you don't own. So anybody can come and run across your tracks or bump over your mine and then take it over because you can't own it. And so we've seen this conflict of what does it mean to claim, to have territory? What does it mean not to have territory? A lot of the conflict right now in the international community is, what does Article 2 mean? Can you extract resources? Does that language say, no, if you extract resources, you owe something to the entire community because you can't appropriate it? Or does it mean you can pull the resources out and use them, you just can't call that your territory? The rest of the articles sort of talk about, as you heard, international responsibility, liability. We don't take contrary to popular opinion, there are laws in space and international law applies in space. So even without the space treaty, we do have this concept of liability. So if that debris, those satellites that we saw from Steve, if you hit something with your space object and you do damage, then you're responsible for it, okay? So the last and most important provision for our purposes with respect to the discussion of the Artemis Accords is Article 9, which says states will conduct activities with due regard for the corresponding interests of other states, avoid harmful contamination, and consult prior to causing harmful interference. What does that all mean? Those are great principles, right? But what does that mean? And in a court of law, in a court of public opinion, we have one way of thinking about due regard. It just means having respect for each other. Courts of law have very different meanings for that kind of thing. And due regard is a balancing act. The court's going to look at all these, primarily three different things. What were you doing? What did you do? And balance which was more important. If we're talking about moving into space as communities with commercial enterprises, we can't spend all of our time litigating things in court, right? Because the language of the Outer Space Treaty is so broad and expansive that every time something happens, we're all back in court. So what we need to do is put up essentially guardrails in terms of start to tease out some of those details about what it means. What does due regard mean? And so I like to call this the gap. This is the gap in space law. We need to mine that gap and we need to start filling it. So the Artemis Accords. So I like to start to talk about really what the Artemis Accords are not. They are not binding bilateral or multilateral treaties. The Artemis Accords are a set of principles and guidelines. They are a lot like the Outer Space Treaty. There's nothing that says you can do this, you cannot do that. It's not intended to be binding treaties. They call it in Section 1 a political commitment to these guidelines and practices. And it applies to only civil space activities. So we've already narrowed it down to civil space activities. And look at where it applies to, on the moon, Mars, comets, asteroids, so forth. It looks like it just applies within our solar system, right? So the Artemis Accords, there's a lot of consternation about them, and they're trying to upend the Outer Space Treaty, but they're not. They're really narrowed themselves down, and again, they're not binding law at this point. They're going to be implemented through national activities and through bilateral agreements. So we have these nations, and it's not nations that have signed, and this is important too. These are space agencies that are signing on to the Artemis Accords. So this is not a binding treaty between the United States and Australia. This is an agreement between NASA and the Australian Space Agency and so forth. Now, that's not to say these aren't an incredible and breakthrough event. The Artemis Accords, I think, are phenomenal because they have made us all sort of sit up and take notice. It is now time to create the details we need to support our expansion into space. And if the United States set these rules down, set these principles down with these allies, and hopefully South Korea, it was announced yesterday that South Korea was intending to also sign the Artemis Accords, and to figure out, okay, we're not making binding law, but we're going to agree that this is how we interpret the Outer Space Treaty. So this is an offer of interpretation that will be implemented through bilateral agreements. So what do the Artemis Accords do? Again, this slide shows you all the things where they absolutely mirror, parallel, or reconfirm principles in the Outer Space Treaty. Section 3 mirrors Article 4, indicating that the moon and other celestial bodies shall be used exclusively for peaceful purposes. Section 4 gives meat to Article 11 by committing the signatories to transparency and sharing of scientific information. Section 6 supports Article 5 of the Outer Space Treaty and recommits the signatories to the Return and Rescue Agreement. Section 7 recognizes the importance of the registration of space objects and commits the signatories to meeting the obligations and responsibilities set forth in the registration agreement. Section 8 reiterates the commitment to share scientific data, embodying again Article 11 and Article 1, where states shall facilitate, encourage international cooperation. And Section 12 commits signatories to orbital debris mitigation as captured in various soft law instruments. So the majority of the Artemis Accords, all they do is reaffirm the principles that were stated in the Outer Space Treaty. They don't add anything, they tease out some details, but they say, we agree, this is what we're going to do. And then they fill the gaps. Section 5 talks about interoperability. Signatories commit to use reasonable efforts to utilize current interoperability standards for space-based infrastructure and to establish such standards when current standards do not exist. Well, that's just common sense. If we have two bases on the moon, two communities on the moon, one's Chinese and Russian, and one is the Artemis Accord allies, if you will, well, it would be pretty silly if we couldn't help each other on the moon when somebody ran out of oxygen. You want to be able to hook up your equipment together. It's silly not to, and it just doesn't make sense. We're all in this together. Section 9, of course, my very favorite part of the Artemis Accords, recognizes that we have heritage in outer space and indicates that we have to preserve and contribute to multilateral efforts to establish rules to protect heritage in outer space. We believe at For All Moonkind that heritage is actually going to be the foundation for agreements in space, because everybody on Earth, every single nation on Earth has ratified the World Heritage Convention, which means every single nation on Earth recognizes that cultural heritage is human heritage. And even if it's whether it's in Egypt or China or the United Kingdom or Ecuador, it belongs to all humanity, and recognizing that the artifacts as human brings us together in special kinship. Section 10 talks about space resources, and it says it's much more detailed, but essentially it opens saying, we recognize Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty, that non-appropriation provision, as saying we can extract resources so long as we don't claim territory. And then the Artemis Accords say extraction of space resources in a manner consistent with the Outer Space Treaty. And finally, Section 11 talks about the deconfliction of activities. Again, common sense. Now, this is again one of the things that we're working at both at University of Mississippi, is teasing out understanding what due regard means. And this is really, due regard means deconflicting activities. And so the Artemis Accords propose the concept of a safety zone. They're not the first to do so, but they're the first sort of state-backed, I guess, organization to do so, or principles to do so. A safety zone, we need to know how far apart how close we can get to somebody without damaging them. And we need to make sure that they're not ridiculous. We don't want a party going up to the moon and saying, I need a 20-kilometer safety zone, otherwise you're going to ruin my stuff. No, we need to have logical, rational safety zones based on science and understanding of the plume effect and things like that. So I kept my talk really short because I really am looking forward to the discussion and understanding more about what Ecuador is doing in space and how we're going to get Ecuador to sign the Artemis Accords. But I'll just leave you with this boot print. This boot print is the first. It's probably not Neil's first footstep, but it represents humankind's very first step off of this earth. It is as this milestone of reaching the moon is humanity's greatest technological achievement. Humanity's, not the United States. It's humanity's greatest technological achievement. And we are standing on the shoulders of giants as we look to that moon. And if we don't do this collaboratively and together, not only will we fail, we might just not even be able to protect Earth at that point too. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And it is a great responsibility for all of us to work together, not just on Earth, but also on space, and collaborate and make sure that we help each other and we look out for each other. and preserving the heritage. Even that photograph, that in itself, it's a cultural heritage of humanity. Just knowing that it is a reminder of what humans can do when we work together.
Absolutely.
Now we welcome Inés Manzano, and it's funny because when I mentioned about the Artemisa in Spanish, she's the Greek goddess of the hunt, wilderness, the moon, and wild animals. And Inés is so much into protecting the environment. It's really, really, really interesting because here we have like the whole scope. We have the legal part, the how do we protect the environment part, how do we protect each other from debris or from somebody playing some bullying games. Now, Inés is the general manager of Estudio Jurídico Manzano and Associates. That's her own legal firm, which she handles with her father, who's also an outstanding lawyer and an incredible teacher of, is it Roman law? I think it is. Yeah, Roman law. And she's also into negotiation, strategic planning, environmental policy, public policy, and management. She has a master's degree in entrepreneurship. She's a deputy secretary for the environmental quality for Ecuador for the Ministry of Environment. She was, and she was also a candidate for the vice presidency of Ecuador. She's founder of the NGO Círculo Verde, which translates to Green Circle. And she's part of the Red de Mujeres, the Harvard Kennedy School for Ecuador. She's a lawyer specialized in environmental law, and she's also a member of the Ecuadorian National Board of Education with Values. That's the Mesa Nacional de Educación con Valores. Inés, it is my pleasure and my honor to welcome you to this panel.
Thank you, and I already have many questions for Michelle and Steve. And I will share my presentation. And I think I'm doing okay, huh? Yeah. Okay. This is very interesting for me because I really want to open the eyes in things that maybe are not discussing tonight and in other forums. It's about this relationship with the data that we have from the space, and also the protection of the environment and other many things that I will try to be. I don't know if I have 20 minutes, but I will do it in that time. As private satellites proliferate and the big data revolution advance, we need to debate public and private roles in space. In the coming decades, new technology and business model will radically expand the data available from satellites and the uses to which it can be put. Our challenge is to ensure that observation about our planet benefit everyone who lives on it. We are urged to discuss more the Artemis Accords with transparency. Even though the Artemis Accords say about transparency and peace, I think that we have to relevate that word, transparency. And I have these 4 things: binding and non-binding, something that Michelle also talked about, and then the constitutional approach, because we are the first country in the world that we have right for nature, and where we are in terms of sustainability, with the data, and then the new government and the new horizons, because in the next week we have the new president. Well, we don't have Oval Office, we have Carondelet Palace. So, and he will be there, and I think if we can start to talk with him about to be involved in these Artemis Accords. And then I put this objective, very, very, in a very resumed way. We have this Outer Space Treaty that also Santiago talked and Michelle talked, and then we have Artemis. And the difference between them is that Outer Space Treaty is binding for every country, and we have like 111 countries are parties right now to the treaty, while another like 23 have signed the treaty but have not completed ratification. We ratified the treaty on January 14 in 1969, and under the government of Jose Maria Velasco Ibarra, which was a very famous president with 4 presidencies, and was entrusted to the Minister of Foreign Relations. And I think that is a problem right now. It's okay to be on the foreign affairs minister, but I think that you have to involve other ministers right now for the Artemis Accords. And as part of the Artemis program, which plans to take like the first woman, and I think it's the 13th man to the moon since 1972, making clear that it's a long-term goal, goes far beyond just talking or doing moonwalks. As Michelle said, this is a bunch of, or a set of principles, guidelines, and best practices. And I don't understand right now how they are not like updating the Outer Space Treaty instead of doing the Artemis Accords. And that's one thing that it's like every time I see and I say, why don't do it like a better or an update this treaty that it's binding for everyone, instead to go to these principles that is not binding. But I understand that the dynamic and the development of the space needs these things like in a very quickly way that like start to discuss these accords. And one of the things that I like most is that we have to consider the space to be a common good, and there are those who do not think like that, and both sides have very smart leaders. So we'll not be able to go to space safely and with peace until both sides reach an agreement, and we have to be part of that agreement. And I think that Ecuador has as other countries also could have a very good role in that. Now there is something on the table that can be discussed, and it's better to have these discussions sooner rather than later. And here we have the constitutional approach from Ecuador. I put it like more or less like 6 articles, not the whole article, but I wanted to make you understand what we are saying through our constitution. So we have this definition of the territory of Ecuador, and we have other part of the territory that are described, but at the last paragraph it says the Ecuadorian state will exercise rights over the corresponding segments of the geostationary synchronous orbit, maritime spaces, and Antarctica. And so they don't. We don't say that we own geostationary synchronic orbit. We say that we'll exercise rights. That is the same principle that we have to have in mind for the moon, asteroid, and other celestial bodies. And then we have the public interest, and this declaration is very interesting because it's the preservation of the environment, the conservation of ecosystems, the biodiversity and the integrity of the country's genetic heritage, the prevention of environmental damage, and the recovery of degraded natural spaces are declared of public interest. And this is a huge statement because we don't have not even the human resources and also the money to do this that we have in a declaration in the Constitution. But if you use data and space data, you can do it better than just a declaration. So then I have the next article, and it's about the fragile and threatened ecosystems. And say the state will regulate the conservation, the management, and the sustainable use, recovery and limitation of the domain of fragile and threatening ecosystem, among others, paramos, wetlands, cloud forests, dry and humid tropical forests, mangrove, marine and marine coastal ecosystem. And these fragile ecosystems are very important for us for the climate change, because we have to understand that we are a country that is very vulnerable for the climate change, and this ecosystem help us to doing better with the effects. But we don't have, as I say in the public interest declaration, we don't have enough money, enough data, information, resources. And then we have this, when our constitution say the state undertakes, and then in just one article, you can find these three undertakes. It's establish effective mechanisms for the prevention and control of environmental pollution, for the recovery of degraded natural areas, and for the sustainable management of natural resources. And then we have ensure the intangibility of protected natural areas. We cannot do that. If you don't know Ecuador have this the jungle of the tropical forest, and we don't have enough helicopters, enough roads to go and see when there is a threatening in these ecosystems. And then I said, and then the Constitution said, in such a way as to guarantee the conservation of biodiversity and the maintenance of the ecological functions of ecosystems. The management and administration of the protected natural areas will be in charge of the state. And then we have this other that said, establish a national system for the prevention, management of risk and natural disaster. That is very important because as I say, we have the Andeans, we have the jungle, we have the coast, we have Galapagos Island. So we have plenty of ecosystems that are in stake, and also for that we have natural disasters. Right now we have one in one of our cities, and the name is Cuenca. So that's a very important thing for us, but we don't have enough resources again. And then we have others like articles, and then we have about the cities. And this is very interesting because I just point out the part of this article that is very interesting for the space law or the treaty of the Artemis Accord. This is the exercise of the right to the city is based on its democratic management. on the social and environmental function of property and the city, and of the full exercise of citizenship. And 70% of Ecuadorians are living right now in the cities. So this is very important for us. So how you maintain or promote the social and environmental function of a city if you don't have data, or if you don't have resources. And then we have economic activities, and this is a right, and they say the right to develop economic activities individually or collectively in accordance with the principle of solidarity, social and environmental responsibility. And right now we are seeing in the Artemis Accord and around this discussion of the space that with the time, more private sector is going outer space than instead of the states. So we don't have a satellite in the space, but you know that there are many big companies that they have it, and so this is important to remind that private sector it's out of the space and is taking information, and that information, the discussion is, it could be for everyone, as the Outer Space Treaty says, or it will be just private and you can monetize, or you can give it or for developing countries, and we don't know, but you have to go in this discussion and direction also. And then we have the use of land, that said the state will regulate the use and access to land that must fulfill the social and environmental function. And I have to say that there is just one law that defines social environmental function, but it's a definition that it's not good enough to know that that the land will have environmental function. So we don't use that law. It's a shame, but we don't use it, and we have to understand that it's like in blank spaces, this thing about the social environmental function. And then I have this about the where we are in the terms on sustainability, that it's a very nice I like this about the space data, or the big data from space. And so we are like seeing that the well use of the data. Here we have two pictures that I love it, because one is for the agriculture, and it says that the agriculture farmers can make use of satellite data to better understand what factors influence the growth of crops, weather patterns, exposure to sunlight, air quality or pest activity, and you can see it there, no? The farm size, the acreage, the crop conditions, the predicted yield, the local weather. So that will be very useful for countries as mine, that we are related with the agri-industrial sector, and it's the base of our economy. So, and the other side, we have this picture with the car park spaces, and identify car from satellite image at they say 55,000 parking lots located in the major retail chains across the US, using this to provide breakdowns and patterns analysis of consumer behavior. It's very, very, it's like for commercial things, it's very useful. And then we have another things that we are using, like monitoring and development of low carbon technologies, monitoring flooding or sinkholes, and with access to historical data, help to predict future areas that may be a risk, used by business to optimize logistic and supply chain routes, achieve better visibility for risk management, monitor assets, and enhance understanding of site location and traffic density. And the last one is they allow building construction to be automatically detected. It's a very brand new that I saw like a month ago. So it's very, very important for sustainable cities, how to grow, where to put the supermarket or the hospital and etc. And then we have this part of where I like to talk about the new government and the new horizon that we have. The President Lasso, just elected in April 11, he has an environmental commitment towards a green economy. And I think that here we have like two dimensions, no? What is happening. One, the space debris and rights of nature, and the other is the satellite forest control that I would talk about. And then the first one, we have this since first Sputnik's launch in 1957 as initial space activities. There have been more than 4,000 rocket launches, as well as many other related debris generating occurrences like more than 150 on-orbit fragmentation events. Of these satellites, about like 3,000 and more remain in space, and most only like 1,000 are still in operation. The rest are just like roaming outer space. And for a definition, the UN Space Debris Mitigation Guidelines accept that this definition of space debris is all man-made objects, including fragments and elements thereof in Earth's orbit or re-entering the atmosphere that are non-functional. This definition of space debris also include re-entry objects, which are captured by the Earth's atmosphere, and they are essentially space garbage. That is the better name is space garbage. And when orbital debris collide with other space objects, the result is more debris. Eventually, some chain reaction of collisions could potentially harm some of the most valuable orbits. And according to the cascade effect hypothesis, even if humans add no additional debris to the Earth's orbit, the amount of orbital debris could still grow exponentially, based on the amount that previously exists. And this is a worry thing, because the other day I was like talking with Robert about this loss of density of the atmosphere. So I'm not a science, but when I was like reading this article, I say it's a very dangerous for the life in the Earth also, and also we have to take care about this space debris or space garbage. And in the Artemis Accord in section 12, they talk about this orbital debris. Say that signatories commit to limit to the extent practicable the generation of new long-lived harmful debris released through normal operation, breakup in operational or post-mission. And they say that the signatory has to be responsible. And then there is a principle in environmental law about that to be responsible of the things that I'm doing, the product that I'm giving to the consumers, how they are recycling or remanufacturing or disposable. So it has to be the same principle for the space garbage or space debris. And in the other article, in Article 9 of the Outer Space Treaty, the states parties shall proceed to explore it in such a way that no harmful pollution or unfavorable change in the Earth environment occur as a result of the introduction of extraterrestrial materials or outer materials. So these are two articles that are in the binding and non-binding instruments, legal instruments. And in Article 10 of our Constitution, it says that nature will be subject to those rights recognized by the Constitution. And those rights are in the Article 71, among others. And when it says that nature, where life is reproduced and carried out, has the right to have its existence fully respected and the maintenance and regeneration of the vital cycle, structure, function, and evolutionary processes. That's why I say at the beginning that Ecuador is the first country that gives rights to the nature, and we have to live with that. And we have now a complex system of law protecting the nature and giving the rights that the Constitution was talking about. That said, being a commitment of President Lasso, the new president, to respect the rights of nature and being aware of the risks that debris in space could be for the density of the atmosphere and life on the planet, as well as knowing the principle of extended producer responsibility that should apply to the states that do space exploration or that have satellites in operation or not, I will believe that it's time to promote, and I say this very seriously, the right of nature beyond the limits of Ecuador. That means that we can say that if other countries also talk about this right of nature, it will be more aware of the signatories of the Artemis Accords or even the Outer Space Treaty about this pollution or this possible harmful for the Earth's atmosphere. And then we have this satellite forest control. That is the other thing that I propose in these examples of the compromise of President Lasso. We talked with him about that if we lost our forests, we lost biodiversity and obviously the genetic resources that are in. And we are trying to talk about bioeconomy, and we are trying to know that this biodiversity is very important for us in the tourism sector, but also for the economic sector. And right now, the multilaterals that give some help, economic help or finance help for Ecuador, they are very worried about what we are doing with our with things around sustainability. So, satellite forest control, it should be very easy if we have this access to this big data from outer space, and even from private sector of the public sector of the NASA. It will be very, very important. It's a priority for the new government, as I say, because it's a way to lose not only biodiversity, but to put an end of corruption. That is another worry for us. And the response will be immediate for the environmental authority also, so they can do things to stop and put in jail all these people that is taking away the biodiversity. And there are firms, as I say, that have developed a space data application for environmental protection. In 2016, satellites monitored some unusual activities in the Tereinohki forest farm in Russia. And Earth monitoring company named Astro Digital noticed evidence of deforestation and informed right away to the World Wildlife Fund, and who were able to launch a legal action. Once the firm's algorithms detected the change, months of data from the European Space Agency Sentinel-2 satellite was pulled as evidence. And this is very important because you are talking that we can use evidence in a legal action from the space. It's very crazy to think about that, but it is possible. And then we have this in the Artemis Accords, the release of scientific data. No? It says the signatories retain the right to communicate and release information to the public regarding their own activities. And these same signatories are committed to the open and sharing of scientific data. And I think these cooperative activities will be of help for countries as Ecuador and other in developing areas. And just to end, like our conclusion, assuming the all goes to plan, that the first woman and the next man will land on the lunar surface by 2024, space resource extraction will move from theory to practice. And by the end of the decade, space tourism could reach out to the moon, and also like 6,000 or more or less small satellites are expected to be launched. Appears that multilateral lawmaking for space is equally challenging. And we need also that Ecuador need to do like better with the biodiversity laws and with the sustainability development. And data from space is a very good solution, even for being financed by multilateral organizations. We have to visualize the interest and the need to be part of the new discussions and promote better control and as I say, transparency and use of outer space for the good of all of mankind. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Inés Manzano, for sharing all that information. And it's interesting how we can all tie it all together, because there is a different point of view from when we are considering a smaller country with lack of resources. But that's when cooperation, which is what Steve and Michelle talked about, comes in. In our case, for example, with the national being part of the National Space Society, the Guayaquil Space Society got in touch with the SPOL, the Polytechnic College in Guayaquil, and our idea was to try to get a sense for where is it that we could put our Guayaquil Spaceport, because we are part of the global spaceport group. And in doing so, the students and teachers from the SPOL actually found out that yes, there was a deforestation of the mangroves. And that's something that we were able to find out only because we were able to connect with the information that we get from the satellite. On the other hand, Ecuador is also having interesting scientists, Ecuadorian scientists, go for space careers. We do have our own space architect, and he's in Houston. And we are developing, of course, a lot of interesting sites for possible space tourism, both for the practice of astronauts in different parts of Ecuador, as well as using those space environments on Earth for maybe leadership, management, or trainings. So it's interesting how it all comes and ties together. With that, I'm going to ask Robert to share with us a few points of view also. Robert, please.
Thank you, Karina. For the National Space Society, advocacy is a really important aspect. And I think that for our chapter, the Guayaquil Space Society, that we also have a role to play in advocating something for our country. And I think this is a great conversation, a first step to take in the right direction, where hopefully with Santiago and Ines as local leaders, they can definitely guide, hopefully a student-led initiative to think about how we can propose to the new government now to sign their Artemis Accord. And I think that could be a great project to lead, where we can have the local university, where we can have existing lawyers like Ines show their perspective about the importance of practicing these international norms and what we can learn so we can replicate here about doing things sustainably. And it's a great example for the next generation in thinking about those terms. And we would love to have the support of you, Michelle, with the National Space Society to give us and guide us through our first baby steps in an advocacy project, I think you're in mute.
Thank you so much, Robert. Steve, this is your chance to ask.
Okay, well, Michelle and Inez, those are great conversations. Michelle really laid out the Artemis Accords quite succinctly. I can't help thinking, and Inez really expanded on the idea that, perhaps, the Artemis Accords, as they are, is a bit of a starting point, right? So there's been a long time since we approved or adopted the Outer Space Treaty. Generally, the Artemis Accords, as I understand it, have come about because the expectations that the UN would be able to negotiate an updated outer space treaty was not really in the cards, at least not in the current environment. So, and maybe this is a good question for Michelle in light of Inez's comments, what appetite do you think there would be in the near term to make some enhancements that there would be a focus that would look towards Earth and the needs of Earth and sustainability for the planet, and then actually more, and from the perspective of the Beyond Earth Institute, where we're interested in human activity, I have a list here of items that I would like to have perhaps considered for a revision of the Artemis Accords that relate to when people start living and working permanently in space, because there's a whole host of other considerations that come into play then. So what would you say to that?
So thank you. First, I just want to say, Robert, you have the full support of the National Space Society and the University of Mississippi School of Law with any of your efforts. And we would be delighted. I have students who would be delighted to help and work with students in Ecuador and work this out. I think to answer your question, Steve, and also Inez, we are starting to do a very good job with remote sensing and Earth observation. The United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs is really working to bring data to the people that need it the most. And we are seeing an acceptance of Earth observation data, as Inez said, even in courts now as evidence. And so I think I look at, I actually teach a whole course on remote sensing law, because it is really, people don't realize how much we already are harnessing the awesome resources of space. And so that's the first step. And we have the disaster charter, where we all agree that we are going to share data in the event of a disaster. Unfortunately, it's after a disaster, and we're trying to figure out better ways to share that. Looking at the Artemis Accords, and I think Inez and Steve reiterated what I tried to say, perhaps clumsily, they are a first step. And when I talk about them as just being principles and guidelines, we're not getting into the meat yet of those details, because it's so hard. I mean, we're never going to renegotiate the Outer Space Treaty. The best thing we can do is try to fill the gaps. So far, we've filled the gaps with soft law. We have debris mitigation guidelines that also need to be updated. We have planetary protection guidelines that also need to be updated. And so this, this evolution of space law, I think we're going to see a lot of this soft law and bilateral agreements. And the concept with the bilateral agreements, though, and why Artemis, I think, is a great framework, is because then you come in and everyone's going to talk about what's important to them. And so I would hope Ecuador would come in and bring all these amazing concepts that are contained in the Constitution about protection and conservation and the environment, and recognizing nature as something more than just something to exploit. The only thing I would say is that I think I caught that the definition of nature was things that were alive and living. There's nothing living on the moon, but there are places I'd like to protect on the moon, even places without heritage on them. I mean, we really have to. There was a question in the chat about how does Artemis deal with this history of colonialism? We really need to have countries like Ecuador in the Artemis Accords now, because we need the diversity of the experience. We need the diversity of perspective in order to operate responsibly and sustainably and successfully in space. I don't know if I answered your question, Steve. But...
Thank you so much, Michelle. Now, Michelle, your turn to ask questions.
I think I just thinking about Ecuador and its constitution, and how I'm just very curious about what movement within Ecuador brought all those provisions into your constitutional documents.
The indigenous people, because we have in the 71 article, it says the right of nature of Pachamama. Pachamama is the name that they give to the nature. So they go to we have like a constitutional assembly, and the indigenous people go and say we need to protect this nature. And we did it, and we didn't know how to do it. So now we have like 13 years from that day, and we still figuring out how to do it, but we are better than in those times. In that time,
I think it's really I mean that's the balance we need to see in space.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because also when we study the culture and the history of indigenous people around the world, most of them, they worship the sun, the moon, the planets. And here we are making sure that we all work together to protect our planet and our planets in general. Santiago, Inés, your chance to ask questions.
I have a question for Steve, and I wrote it down because I didn't want to forget. And it's these communities in space that you show to us. It should be like, why we don't have lessons from other communities that we have in common goods, like Antarctica, because as Ecuador we have a lot there, a space there, and we go there and we share with the other countries there. So it's like, if we can see that because I never saw the guideline for the space community, so I want to asking if some of these lessons that we have in Antarctica, it would be good to reply in the space communities.
The earliest space communities might look something similar to the Antarctic communities, a base of that nature. But I think just more broadly speaking, we are, this effort is truly an international effort, right? It's going to be extremely difficult for us to get to the moon. That's an international effort on its own. If we establish a lunar base, on the moon. That's going to be an international effort. We're all kind of going there together. And the expectation is that this going there together will evolve into a larger and larger community of people. And so that's very important. That's why we're very interested in the Artemis Accords, because it's not just going to be a single country or single corporation that's going to do it. I think we go up there, we go into space as a human family. We go up there with our traditions and hopes for not only expanding knowledge and our own consciousness, if you will, as we explore and expand into space, but that by virtue of that expansion, we're also enlightening people that are here and remain on Earth. So I think so this is it's a long process that it's going to take for us to get there, and I think that there are analogs that we can point to here on Earth, so that's how we're approaching it. Other folks may have other ideas, but that's the way I look at it.
Thank you so much, Steve. By the way, in the chat, Steve shared the Beyond Earth paper relating to the Artemis Accords. And Michelle shared a link to the registry of human objects on the moon. You might want to copy and paste that to whatever it is that you keep, maybe Word or something, because once this chat closes, then we will lose those links. Santiago from the University Espíritu Santo, it's your turn to ask.
Thanks. But first, I want to make an addition as a response that Ines said before. I think that in addition of the indigenous people, it's important to consider that for everyone in the Ecuador, we have the conscious about the importance of the nature, because we are not a development country, but we know that we are rich in natural resources, no? And in addition, it's not a technical reason, but it's a political one, that the people that work in the writing of the Constitution follow models of another constitutions, like the Bolivian ones, that makes highlights in this kind of topics. But I agree in the sustain that the indigenous people have the main importance is this, because our Constitution recognizes especially their rights. And my question is for Michelle. I have a curious about the space law studies. So, it is everyone that study law studies space law in your university. It's a postgraduate course. It's an optional course. How long does it take?
So the University of Mississippi offers 3 different degrees. We do a JD concentration. So in the United States, you earn your law degree after you go to college. So you can get a JD concentration. You can do the Master of Laws course, which takes 1 year. And it's you take 6 or 8 courses, depending on whether you want to write a thesis. And then the graduate certificate also takes 1 year. You take 2 to 4 courses total to earn it. We are really proud to offer more space law, unique and different space law courses than any other university in the world. We offer 7 now completely new and different aspects of space law. And so we go very far beyond just your international space law course that universities are just starting to have, right? My goal at Mississippi is to make space law part of our first year curriculum. The way in the United States, we have to learn constitutional law and contract law and property law. I think we ought to learn space law as well, because the fact is that everything we do on Earth is going to be impacted from space, can be made better from space. And you know, we're seeing remote sensing coming in as evidence. Any lawyer, we think, 10 years from now will actually be malpracticing their clients if they don't have a good understanding of space law and how it works.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And this is one of the objectives of the Guayaquil Space Society, to link people together, to create enthusiasm in students to learn STEM and STEAM careers, careers that will put them in the right path towards in a career in space. And in this case, it would be awesome for us to be able to link the Universidad Espíritu Santo with the University of Mississippi and other universities in Ecuador, and hopefully have Santiago and Inés be our first Ecuadorian space lawyers. So wouldn't that be outstanding? That would be absolutely wonderful. Now we do have a question from Paul Luzuriaga. Paul is asking, and just let me know which of you speakers would like to answer that. Is there any provision about responsibility of space waste? I guess at some point it would be necessary to start cleaning up and dealing with the debris.
I can take,
Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
So when we talk about activities in space, I think Inés was talking about it really well about environmental laws and what happens in space. Right now, we just have the Outer Space Treaty. So the only thing that we have is this concept of due regard. And so a lot of us in the space law community are trying to make this concept of due regard tease out a definition which makes it a requirement that you don't leave your garbage in space anymore. The United States is actually at the forefront of this debris mitigation and remediation in terms of law. And we put very strict requirements on our licensees of people who launch things into space. And so our hope is that the rest of the world will also follow. But there are also companies, the Japanese company Astroscale is working with the European Space Agency to actually do proof of concept of space missions that will remove debris from space. And so, you know, the Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space has also heightened the concept of space debris as one of the biggest issues that they have to deal with. But I think fundamentally, you know, Inés said it perfectly. You know, we owe a responsibility to each other. Right now, nobody's making the argument that environmental law applies to space, but you know, it should. I mean, we are all polluting something that we share, but we're working on it.
Yeah, and I'd like to think of the way sanitation was back in the 15th and 16th century, where everyone's living together, but our waste management was horrendous. You know, you just threw whatever you had out in the street. But over time, as populations increased, that was no longer tenable. And, you know, for decades, it was fine. You know, the amount of debris up there was acceptable, even though people have been talking about debris mitigation for decades, literally. But now it's gotten to the point where we just can't ignore it. You know, it has to be addressed, and it has to be a collective responsibility among all stakeholders, because it is the commons, it is the ultimate commons. And if we don't deal with it, then all these other dreams that we have for space it may not come about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Steve. And right along with what Michelle and Steve mentioned, I'd like to read a comment from Michael Turner. He says, I've been to Ecuador, visited Guayaquil, climbed Mount Pichincha to see Quito at sunset. It was gorgeous. But what got me there was the potential natural resource of cheaper access to equatorial LEO, L-E-O, from high mountains near the equator. I'm interested in the environmental and social impacts of such launch development, but also in how equatorial LEO might need a special legal status as space law evolves. Now, one comment that I could sense when I was listening to Inés' presentation is that in Ecuador, correct me if I'm wrong, Inez, it's more like the government, the state in itself would handle more things that have to do in space. But it is interesting to see that there is an article that maybe Steve and Michelle can talk to us about. There is an article, I don't know if it's in the Artemis Accord or if in another treaty or what, but actually in the US, there is a provision there for regular entrepreneurs to be able to work or start enterprises that have to do with space, but yet the government will be responsible for those nationals. Could you talk about a little bit more about that, Steve, please?
Yes, according to the Outer Space Treaty, the nation state within which the company or entity or startup resides is responsible for the behavior of that company ultimately. So, and that's the essence of it. And I think, Michelle is sort of the scholar on this. Certainly, Michelle, maybe you want to add to that.
Certainly, so Article 6, and this is why in the United States we have a very rigorous licensing regime, because anything that happens in space actually goes back onto the liability of the nation itself. And so this is actually something very worrying in terms of what we allow people to do in space, because if one of Elon Musk's Starlink impacts another spacecraft, then not only is Elon Musk liable, but the United States is liable because he launched from the United States. And so this is a system that has worked so far because we have mostly had governments and not commercial entities in space. And now we're really testing the limits of that liability. And what's even more concerning, and one thing that the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs is trying to do, is to get more and more countries to sign the Outer Space Treaty, because we don't want a race to the bottom or a flag of convenience. And we don't want somebody saying, oh, I'm going to go launch from I can't think of a country that's not in the Outer Space Treaty right now, but or launch from a country that doesn't have a rigorous licensing regime, and so it's really, really important. And when Ecuador is drafting its space law, I would encourage you to look at U.S. space law as a model, because it's really one of the strictest in the world.
Right. Or somebody just going and setting a base in the middle of the ocean on international waters. They don't belong to anybody. So here I am making my own little space, not putting any ideas into anybody.
And about the impacts of the social and environmental impacts that we're asking, I think is Michael. We need license for activities. And from the minister, because it's the only one from such of things like the LEO that could give to you. No the municipalities, or we have prefecturas. It's just the authority, the national authority.
Karina.
Yes.
We're right on the hour.
I was about to say that. This is getting
what an
so
amazing
interesting.
program, right?
Yes.
What an amazing program.
It's been absolutely wonderful. By the way, if you want to become a member of the Guayaquil Space Society, you can just talk to Robert and say, I want to be a member. And make sure you also become a member of the National Space Society. And that will mean that you can actually run for office in our Guayaquil Space Society. The webinars that we handle, they're outstanding every time, and I encourage you to join us on our YouTube page. It's actually Guayaquil Space Society, and you can watch them, and you can also contact us through the social media at Guayaquil Space. It's been an interesting night. Thank you so very much for all of you. I don't know if Consuelo Hidalgo was able to make it from the Centro Ecuatoriano Norteamericano. They are our sponsors. They've been in business in Ecuador for 70 years, and Guayaquil in itself is always a starting point for Latin America. their connection between Guayaquil and the United States of America through our the first consul general of the USA happened in Guayaquil in 1824, even before Ecuador was created as a country. So there are links there that connect us, and hopefully you are also connected to our next webinar. Thank you so very much, Michelle. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Santiago. Thank you, Inez. And thank you so much to our own Robert Ayan. Robert, your last words.
Have a wonderful night. Santiago, it is incredible to have you with us. We definitely want the students from US University to be leaders in these type of initiatives. And Steve and Michelle, we definitely would love your support so this next generation are really prepared. And Inez, your experience in sustainability is going to be really important in what the future brings. And Ecuador depends on people like you, just so you know. Thank you. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank
It was a great experience. Thank you all. Good night.